Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of the Liberia History Channel on Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition of the Liberia History Channel, we're going to be talking about the Amistad captives of the Gola rainforest. Maybe you watched the movie, you read about it, but tonight we're going to blow your it will blow you off. I mean, Liberia has so much history that even in my adult life, I look back, I say, but why didn't I know this? Thank God for the Liberia History Channel, where we are learning a lot of things about Liberian history. I am glad to have our presenter called Yeyia.
Yeah.
And to our many listeners, we say Kanu Yola Itosie right here on the Liberia History Channel. Call, welcome.
Thank you, Dennis. It's always my pleasure to be here. I'm so excited about this show because it's a show. This story is a story about triumph, against incredible adversity. And it's something for us to look at and understand that, slavery was not something that people just laid down and accepted. There are many stories of rebellions that often ended in execution. Many stories of rebellion that ended up in massacres of the rebels, of the people who rebelled against slavery. Numerous. But this story, of course, the Haitian Revolution, there are so many also that ended it with triumph. And this is one that really stands out.
We want to welcome all viewers from across the globe. This is the Liberia History Channel. We're going to be talking to Amistad. Yeah. Big deal about this story. Last week, and we got a lot of positive feedback when we did a story on the Gola Gichi. Right here on Liberia. Because a lot of things, and sometimes when you Google these things or use Wikipedia, everything, you don't really see the Liberian in it. That history. I mean, sometimes by the time you say it, I mean, they bring out something and they just go on with it, not knowing Liberia front and center. So I'm excited. Yeah. I'm thrilled that we are discussing this, and we hope our many listeners, even those that are watching live and those that are watching it, or share the show with somebody, share the History Channel playlist with someone, and let's go over all the Liberian history. Very profound, very deep, and every time I go through this, I can even not be any prouder to be a Liberian. I'm very proud that I came from a group of people that's so resilient. And one of those we're going to see in the story tonight about the triumph that Carl already spoke about.
Yes. Absolutely.
Great. And so we called it the Amistad Captives of the Gola Forest.
Yes.
Incredible story.
So it must be stated that it was during President Gardner's time, that the Gola rainforest left the hands, some parts of the Gola rainforest and parts of the Galinas territory, not all, because, we were very triumphant in our resistance of the British encroachment on our territory. But this originally was Liberia. It was part of Liberia's sovereign territory. The British took it unlawfully and by force. So the Amistad captives were taken from Galinas. And this is in the heart, the center of the Vai, or what we used to pronounce Vai Kingdom. And many of the people on board the Amistad were ethnic Liberians, though Liberia was just a commonwealth.
Let me stop you there, because that's very interesting, right? Because when anyone who right now put this in a Google search, they will say it's from Sierra Leone. What you are saying is the region, what they call Sierra Leone now, that time, that was Liberia. That was our territory.
Right.
The Galinas.
Yeah. Joseph Jenkins Roberts toppled Galinas after this incident, of course. It became part of Liberia. There was no country called Sierra Leone at the time, right? You have Freetown in its vicinity. Galinas was a place unto itself. And so when we were independent in 1847, Galinas was part of the autonomous areas and eventually was incorporated by Liberia fully. It was the British who later took it by force and unlawfully, conquering the Vi. And the only reason they didn't take Cape Mount is because there was resistance, and the Liberian government joined the Vi to stop the British at the Mano River, or the Macana River, or the Galinas River, as they call it. It has many names. But this river is what divides the Vi kingdom.
Wow.
So these are our people. These are our relatives. You've got people here. We'll get into why I'm saying, you'll hear them say, oh, the people were all Mende. They were all Mende people. What does that really mean? I'm going to, go on and explain some things that will debunk that. While some of them were Mende, not all of them were. And all of them were from the Gola rainforest, which is now shared by Liberia and Sierra Leone.
Good.
So any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's clear. That's very important, right? Because and maybe that's one reason why we don't hear much of this, because we think it's not us, right? It's the other person.
Yeah, we like to sit down and let Sierra Leone, kind of take our glory. Yeah. Sierra Leone has done a really good job of taking a lot of Liberian history, even the Koya Kingdom. The Sierra Leoneans say for them, when those who described the Koya Kingdom said that it stretched from Cape Dumont to Cape Mesurado, how it becomes Sierra Leonean history is beyond me. The primary sources cite this kingdom in the middle of Liberia. It isn't even, previous Liberian territory. So we have to be careful when we're reading some of these things. When you leave your property, other people will claim it.
Yeah. It goes back, even though we try sometimes beating the dead horse, because Liberian history really is not taught in Liberia. So we go through kindergarten to high school and college without knowing all these things. But thank God for the Liberian History Channel.
Absolutely. So this is the Vi Kingdom, present day, what Vi people are. The black line, of course, is the river, and it's also the boundary delineation between Liberia and Sierra Leone, modern boundary delineation. Galinas, where these people were taken from, Limpopo, is literally right there at the boundary. So we know that north of there, we have what is Bopulu and Lofa in the Gola forest.
Right.
So what you'll find out is many of these people were marched down through the forest. So you've got Kisi people, you've got Bandi people, you've got Pele people, you've got people of different ethnic groups being marched down to that place to be taken into slavery. During this period, because the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, was illegal in 1839. However, the illicit slave trade continued. The illegal slave trade. Pedro Blanco, who later, after he was toppled by Joseph Jenkins Roberts, and he led forces to get rid of that Galinas. Pedro Blanco then retreated and settled in Cuba for the rest of his years. But he basically had a stronghold there, where he was basically selling human beings in broad daylight. Hundreds of ships were still going there annually to purchase human beings that he and his allied they call them kings, but renegade slave traders were raiding people and buying people that had been pawned, that had been captured at war, and all of these things. And Pedro Blanco, of course, was a Spaniard. So that's where he was seated and located until he was unseated by the Liberians. Because if you watch other episodes, one thing you'll understand is that Liberians were radical abolitionists and violent abolitionists. Even going back to the days of the Commonwealth, it was violent abolition. Dismantle these places by violence and then followed by treaty. So you subdue them by force, and then they succumb through some legal framework and give up the act of selling human beings. But Galenas and Robertsport were the two main locations where people of the Vi Kingdom sold human beings.
And those who they were selling, where they came from, mainly around there, or some came from as far as Bassa?
Well, most of these people, what we know from so Bassa was also selling people right down there, but these people mostly came from the Gola rainforest.
Okay.
So that would be north of where that red arrow is, going into Bopulu and Lofa, Kenema area.
Let's talk about Pedro Blanco a little bit. He was around this area selling human beings before
he was set. Yeah, so you had these Europeans who were stationed all along the coast. Even in Robertsport, you had Robert, who was there, also a Spaniard. And you had Pedro Blanco at Galenas. Robert had been toppled. And then you had at Petit Mesurado or Providence or Perseverance Island, you had John S. Mill's father, John S. Mill Sr., who was a British person. And so all along the coast, you had Europeans stationed, even long before 1822, since the 1700s. They had various Europeans who set up their operations permanently. And they were cooperating with local slave raiders that were calling themselves kings.
Good.
So this is just another view of Galenas. You can see this is an older map from the time period. You see you've got the Bullum territory there just above the arrow. And we all know that Boatswain, who the repatriates met when they came to Cape Mesurado, was Bullum, because he was from Shabar, so he was part of the Bullum ethnic group, and that's what he told them, and that was what the primary sources documented. He was Bullum from Shabar. Shabar is between Sherbro and Galenas. He got the name Boatswain because he was working on a British slave ship as a boatswain, so he just called himself that. And our people pronounce it bosun, and it was boatswain, of course. But our native people would say bosun, but it was actually boatswain. So bosun or boatswain was from right above that arrow, and then you have Pedro Blanco's notorious operations. When the Amistad captives were captured, though, bosun or boatswain has long been gone. He was no longer alive at that time. He died in 1828, and this was 1839. So he had been gone for about 11 years. And then you've got, again, Robertsport, not too far away, where Robert would have been stationed in the late 1700s. At this time, he no longer was stationed there, but other British traders were, including the infamous slave trader who wrote 12 years, not 12 years, what is it? It slips my mind. Thank goodness. I don't like to remember these slave traders. Anyway, there's an infamous slave trader who also was staying there at Robertsport in Cape Mount. And when I think of his name, I'll mention it.
Okay.
So there's a lot of Europeans here, even though Liberia exists, and we all know that some of the reasons that they incited people to fight the repatriated people was because they did not want another Freetown on that part of the coast, because Freetown and its vicinity was a no slavery zone. So between Galinas and Cape Palmas, and even going into what is now Ivory Coast, you still had illegal illicit slave trading going on. 1822, these people arrive at Cape Mazarado, and it becomes an issue because they're not, they're going to basically, the people who were fighting them were correct. They were going to set up another Freetown. Monrovia was just like Freetown, a slavery-free area, and the people of Monrovia were fighting and working with the British and the Americans to snuff out the slave trade in their vicinity. So it extended the slavery-free zone from Freetown all the way now to all the areas that were settled along the coast by the various colonization societies. So we can go to the next slide unless you have questions.
No.
All right, so this is an 1840 engravement about the Amistad revolt. So this was a year after they had revolted. It was a sensational story. Basically, what happened was they captured these people. They captured these people from various capacities that had taken them to Galinas. And this ship, La Amistad, which was a Spanish slaver, was planning to take them to Cuba for them to be sold. So they were on a mission to take these human beings to Cuba. And these men who were on the ship were all part of Poro ethnic groups, I'm sorry, with an S. So they were all Poro men. They were part of a brotherhood and alliance. This was a grave mistake on the part of those who purchased them. Because even though they came from different backgrounds, they had that a common bond.
Right.
Being Poro men, they were able to throw sign or signal or whatever, who knows what kind of, elite knowledge they shared among themselves through their brotherhood in this ancient, brotherhood that they belonged to. They were able to coordinate a rebellion under the most impossible circumstances and overtake the ship. So this was shocking. So I'm not sure if it was sign language or what exactly it was, but they were able to overthrow this vessel. Any questions there?
No, and they could be speaking their language, right?
They did not. Well, yeah. So they may have all spoken the same language because, as we know, many people were multilingual. They spoke many languages. So it is entirely possible that they did. Absolutely. But we can go to the, yeah. Did you have a question?
They got them from Liberia because this is 1839.
Mm-hmm.
So where specifically did this revolt take place?
On the ship.
I mean, it was on the sea, right? But
yeah,
was it still in Cuban territory, African territory, or where exactly?
We're gonna get into this. We can read the next slide.
Okay. So the captain spared the two white men, Luis and Pedro Montes, who had purchased them. Knowing nothing of navigation, they attempted to force Montes and Luis to sail them to Africa, but the Spaniards had other plans. They steered toward the United States coast at night. The vessel zigzagged at sea for 2 months. Before the Washington, an American patrol ship, seized it off a colonial point in eastern Long Island Sound on August 26, 1839. The Amistad was towed to New London, Connecticut.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Ja.
So we say the captors, they spared the two white men, right?
Yeah, so because they needed somebody to help navigate them back home. So basically, they would be trying to get back to West Africa, and the captives, the slavers become the captives.
Mm-hmm.
So in the daytime, they would use their equipment and navigate north. And at night, when Sinke and the others could look at the stars, they knew which way West Africa was. They would make them turn the ship towards West Africa. So they played this game until they ended up in U.S. territorial waters.
So the slavers, they were kind of steering the ship now, even before the white people were.
Wait, say that again?
No, I said, so the Africans will steer the ship towards West Africa.
They would direct them to turn the ship towards West Africa based on their knowledge of astronomy.
Okay.
Right? So they're looking at the stars and they're like, wait a minute, our home is in that direction. Because our people would navigate direction at night based on celestial bodies, and they would say, okay, this particular star is in this direction. It was much easier. We have an ancient history of doing that, right? That dates back many centuries. So they had that knowledge. Again, these men had been part of Poro. So these may have been some of the elite knowledge that they learned in the Poro school, which is how to read the stars. But they were able to do that at night, not in the day.
Oh, when the stars are up.
Yes.
That makes sense. Memorandum from the Department of State to the Secretary of the Navy. Department of State, January 2, 1810. The vessel destined to convey the Negroes of the Amistad to Cuba to be ordered to anchor off the port of New Haven, Connecticut, as early as the 10th of January next, and be in readiness to receive said Negroes from the Marshal of the United States and proceed with them to Havana under instructions to be henceafter transmitted. Lieutenant Gatney and Meadu, I think, to be ordered to hold themselves in readiness to proceed in the same vessel for the purpose of affording their testimony in any proceedings that may be ordered by the authorities in Cuba in the matter. These orders should be given with special instructions that they are not to be communicated to anyone.
Yes.
But this is the date wrong? 1810?
1840? What does it say? 1810?
Okay, 40, because maybe I'm not saying it right.
Yeah. You talking about January 2nd, 1840?
1840, okay.
Mm-hmm.
That looks like one to me.
No, it's a 4. January 2nd, 1840. So, do you have any questions on that? So here's what I want to explain, just to give a backstory. The transatlantic slave trade was illegal. It was illegal to bring new Africans from the continent of Africa and bring them to the Western Hemisphere, West Africa is technically the Western Hemisphere, but bring them across the Atlantic to the Americas and the Caribbean and sell them. That was illegal. The British and the United States had determined, and the rest of the world had determined this was not legal. It was still happening anyway. So now the Spanish, who want these people to be sold to Cuba because it's building up their wealth, are going to lie and say this was part of the intra-American slave trade, meaning that it was still legal to sell human beings between islands and the mainland United States and North America and South America. It was still legal within the Americas and the Caribbean to exchange human beings, but you could not bring new humans across the Atlantic from Africa. So when people were caught, they would always try to lie and say, oh no, we got these people in Cuba, we got them in Grenada, we got them in, some islands or in Brazil, and we're taking them to this place.
Yeah.
When in fact, much of the time, these had been Africans that were brought into the Americas illegally, smuggled in.
Right. And they are lying because even though it's illegal for the bringing people from Africa here, but it is legal to do slavery within North America.
Yes. You have breeding grounds. So you have places like Barbuda, which is Antigua Barbuda, right? The small part of the country, Antigua Barbuda, not Bermuda, but Barbuda, which is part of Antigua. That was a breeding ground for slaves. So a lot of times ships would go there, buy people, because they would have these big, strong men and forcibly, mate them with women, and then they would have children, and they reach a certain age, they could be sold. Very valuable human beings. So that was still legal. To breed people like you're breeding animals, that was still legal. But to bring new Africans was not legal. And we've talked about this on many episodes. The reason it wasn't legal is because exactly what happened. They were born free. They were going to fight for their freedom, and they didn't want any more rebellions in the Americas. There were numerous slave revolts. This is after Nat Turner. This is during a time when there were slave revolts popping up all over the place. So they didn't want any more trouble coming out of Africa with free people. It's easier to breed them, break them down from childhood, and teach them that this was actually what they were supposed to be, that they're supposed to be slaves, than to take a grown man, like Singbe, that they pronounce Sinke. They take Singbe and take Singbe and say, okay, Singbe, you're a slave. Singbe is not going to accept that. And he didn't accept it.
He's going to fight.
Yeah.
And what are they saying, that these people were supposed to be taken back to Cuba?
Because they were lying and saying that they were purchased in Cuba.
Oh, okay.
But we know they were not purchased in Cuba. They were purchased near Galinas, and they were being taken to Cuba. But they were lying and saying that they were purchased in Cuba. The fact of the matter is they were not. And these men could not speak English. So they couldn't speak Spanish either. And that was one of the red flags it raised with the U.S. Marshals. But if you came from Cuba, why is it they can't understand a word of Spanish? And why are they dressed like this? Why are they wearing these African beads and all this stuff if they came from Cuba?
The 43 captives arrived in New Haven in September 1839 caused a sensation. Townspeople lined the street as the Africans were marched from the Long Wharf to the jail. Yeah. Legal proceedings began immediately. The captives, including 3 young girls, were detained in 4 cells in the county jail in New Haven, near the city green, as the courts determined their fates. Colonel Stanton Petherton, the jailer, charged curiosity seekers a shilling each to view his unusual prisoners. Phrenologists visited the jail to measure the captives' scores.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
It's the time of that real scientific racism and all that craziness, right? So these are some of the sketches that were done, of the people. What they would do is they would shine a light on them, and then they would sketch over the shadow that was cast on the wall. How incredibly stupid for them to do that. Because it was a way for them to be able to measure their skulls and all that kind of thing.
To get what? What are you trying to determine with the measurement of the score?
Well, there's such a I mean, it's a whole different conversation, but scientific racism, basically, the pseudoscience of basically trying to, they believe that people's skull and the width of their foreheads and the brow and all these things could determine what type of human being they were, that there were some kind of subhumans and all this kind of thing. Because the whole science that had to be created to justify enslaving African people.
So Josiah Wheeler Gibbs, a clergyman and Yale professor of ancient languages, attempted to break the language barrier between the Africans and the American allies. Gibbs, 1809 BA, learned the captives' words for the first 10 numerals and walked along the wharves of New Haven and New York City, counting aloud in African tongue, hoping someone would understand the numbers.
So he learned to count to 10 in Mende. And he decided that because at that time in history, you had people working on these ships from Africa as ship hands, kind of like how Boatswain had done in the late 1700s. As late as 1839, you still had Africans, even some crewmen and different people working on these ships. And they will come into New Haven port, they will go into Staten Island port, New York main port, all of these places, and it would be working, speaking broken English. So he felt that if he was to count out loud, and this is depicted very well in the movie, by the way, if he was to count out loud, somebody would hear it and recognize and be able to recognize the language. And that's how he was going to find an interpreter. He was hoping, anyway, to find an interpreter by doing this. If I go and I start counting, somebody will hear me. And they will recognize the language, and then I can take them so that they can interpret for us. And these people can tell their own story about where they came from, and if in fact they were coming from Cuba, or if they were coming from Africa. Because it was circumstantial. The abolitionists were just assuming they were African, but they could not understand them. Partially, the reason they assumed they were African is because they were speaking languages that they didn't understand.
And they were black.
Well, if they were slaves from Cuba, they would have also been black.
Okay.
Because many people from Galenas were already in Cuba, right? For generations.
So Professor Gibbs counted down Ta.
Yeah. So Ta, Yila, Fele, Sawa, Nani, Lilu, Weta, Wefla, Wayakba, Talu, Pon.
10 years, everybody call it the same way.
Yeah. In manner that boom. Or boom. Not boom, boom, boom. So yeah, 10. So he's walking around like a crazy man, shouting. Ta, Fela, Sawa, Nani, Lilu, Weta, Wefla, Wayekpa, Talu, Pon. Up and down the ports of New Haven, Connecticut, and then later Staten Island. This image is actually a 1870, this is 30 years later, but a depiction of the port at New York, at Staten Island. It wouldn't have changed too much, So he's walking on the dock, looking at the laborers, who some of them are African, and he will go near them and be chanting, and some of them will be looking at him like he's crazy. But eventually, if we go to the next slide.
During one of these waterfront forays on Staten Island, let's see what happened. Gibbs encountered James Covey, a young sailor on the HMS Bozat, a British cruiser that recently seized 2 slave ships. An 18-year-old native African, Covey could speak Mende, the captive's language. The Bozat's captain let Covey travel to New Haven for as long as the case required. Baldwin's papers include Covey's October 4, 1839 deposition, in which the young sailor describes his conversation with Africans. He reports that they speak of Lumboko, an infamous slave fortress in the west coast of Africa where the captives had been held before embarking on the Middle Passage.
So the Middle Passage, as we all know, is that journey across the Atlantic, and Lomboko is at Galines. Lomboko is Pedro Blanco's slave dungeon at Galines. So this is a very young child who is himself a semi-slave. He's his property, right? He's there as a servant working on the ship, probably since he was 12 or so. And he recognized the counting, like, oh, wait a minute, I know this language. So this very young kid tells them, hey, I can understand the language, and therefore they ask his owners, can we use him as an interpreter? Can we use him as an interpreter? So they agree to it. Now, the sketch above this text is of Lomboko or Galines. Look at the kind of hustle and bustle and activity that was happening there in the 1830s. Look at the amount of ships that used to be waiting for human beings, and they say that the slave trade was illegal at the time. Broad daylight. So Pedro Blanco was so rich and powerful, he used to bribe the British who used to monitor the west coast of Africa so they wouldn't touch any of the ships coming to him.
Why weren't the poor Negroes hanged? The Amistad case raises issues about jurisdictions, savage rights, and whether the captives should be tried for murder and piracy. Ultimately, the case boiled down to whether the Amistad captives were slaves or free. According to the Spaniard, the captives were Ladino, or slaves long settled in Cuba. The abolitionists argued that the captives were Bozal, meaning blacks recently imported from Africa. So this is court now. They're in court.
Yeah. So they're in court, and of course, these people are lying. They're telling bombastic lies about that these people came from from Cuba. They were settled in Cuba long before the illegal transatlantic slave trade. So therefore, they should give them back their property so they can take them to Cuba. So the lower courts ruled in favor of the Spaniards. But this case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Mind you, if they had been free, they would have been murdered. Nobody was going to sell them. They're going to take them and probably torture them and execute every last one of them for killing the crew, with the exception of 2 people. So the Spaniards are fighting like hell to get these people out of the custody of the U.S. government, who consequently was holding slaves. But they were fortunate that they landed in Connecticut and not Georgia or South Carolina somewhere, or Florida, because they would have just been given back to the Spaniards. But because they landed in Connecticut, which was a place with a high concentration of abolitionists, highly educated people who were against the slave trade anyway, they were going to use this as an example to show why these men had a right to fight to the death for their liberty. And the fact that they did fight to the death for their liberty means that they did not belong in chains. Because if they belonged in chains, why would they have been fighting for their freedom?
These are sketches again. William H. Townsend's sketches of the Amistad captives depict distinct individuals who overpowered their captors aboard the slave ship and later secured their freedom. in the American court system.
So these are drawings that they did of some of them. There were 44. But Townsend was an artist who depicted these people, drew them a little more humane than those shadow drawings that you saw. So you can actually see that they had faces and there were people that looked like everybody else we know, right?
Yeah.
And
I could see the Pella girl.
she looks Pella, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's my friend Goma.
So we can go to the next slide. So what the Sinke, which his name was actually Singbe. If you look at number 1,
yeah,
Singbe. That's what he said his name was. They start calling him Sinke, right?
So Singbe was born in Mani in Zopwa, in the open land in the Mende country. The distance from Mani to Lomboko, which is Galena, he says, is 10 sons or days. His mother is dead, and he lived with his father. He has a wife and 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters. His son name is Yeyia God. His king, Kalumbo, lived at Kor Mende, a large town in the Mende country. He is a planter of rice and never owned or sold slaves. He was seized by 4 men when traveling in the road, and his right hand tied to his neck. Maya Gigla Lo sold him to Bamanza, son of Shaka, king of Genduma, in the Vai country. Bamanza carried him to Lubonko and sold him to Espanol. He was
with Pedro Blanco. Go ahead.
Yeah. He was with Maya Gilalo 3 nights, with Bamanza 1 month, and Lombogo 2 months. He had heard of Pedro Blanco, who lived at Telu near Lomboko.
Yes.
Yeah, my African is very good.
So we have his firsthand account. Now, because this 18-year-old boy is able to translate. This 18-year-old boy is able to translate. We can hear his story. Mind you, in those days, Mende was a trade language. A trade language. So one of the things that they did not understand at that time is that people didn't have to be Mende to speak Mende, because it was a language that was used to communicate inter-ethnic communication. So just like how we use English now as a trade language. Maninka was a trade language, still is a trade language. So these larger language groups that were languages that were easier to learn, this is how they were able to communicate with each other as well.
Yeah.
Any questions on this one?
No, I like how they try to make his name Spanish.
Right. And he says they were Singbe. Yeah. And here's the other thing. Oh, the slaver I was talking about that was up and down that area too, that worked with supplied human beings for Pedro Blanco from Cape Mount was Captain Cano. So, yeah, horrible human being. He's a monster. I'll go to the next slide.
These monsters.
And a horrible liar too.
Yeah, you see our friend from Nimba, Batu.
Yeah, that is clearly a mononym, you know. Yeah.
Batu, a club or so. Height 5 feet 6 inches. That's my height. With a tattooed breast, was born in the country of Tuma, near a large body of fresh water called Maua. His father is a gentleman and does no work. His king, named Dabe, resided in the town of Tuma or Tuma. He was sent by his father to a village to buy clothes. On his return, he was seized by 6 men, and his hands tied behind. Was 10 days in going to Lumbongo. There are high mountains in this country. Rice is cultivated. People have guns, has seen elephants.
Yeah, those are the notes that were translated by this young man. And Batu was so you have to remember this is an 18-year-old boy translating the best he can.
Right.
And Batu is not a Mende man, so he's trying to tell his story in Mende. So some things could be confused, like it might have been, it took him 10 months to reach, or 10 weeks to reach. They say 10 days. So the translation is not 100% accurate. Because you've got an 18-year-old translator translating Mende from a person who is not a native Mende speaker. But you get the gist of his story.
Right. Especially when it comes to there are high mountains in the country, rice is cultivated, people have gone, has seen elephants. Then you know that some of the
That is on Nimba, right?
Yeah.
He came from far away. Yeah.
Then there is another brother here.
So this is Nyakwe, is what he told them his name was. Nyakwe.
Nyakwe. In Balu Dalet, second born. And yeah.
Nyakwe. So he could now in Pele, Ikpe, I don't know if Nyakwe means second born, but in Manu it means second born.
So Yankwe in Balu Dalet, second born, was born at Congo, Lahun, the largest town in the Balu country. This town is situated on a large river called Imbalu Zalibu and in Mende Kawara. Fish are caught in this river as large as a man's body. They are caught in nets and sometimes shot with guns. When going to the Gold country to buy clothes, he was taken and sold to a vile man who sold him to Spaniard named Pele. Yankwe has a wife and one child. He calls himself a Bala man, has learned the Mende language since he was a slave, 5 feet 6 inches in height.
So he another one who's picked up Mende. He's been enslaved probably for a long time. And he picked up the Mende language. Again, it's a trade language, so it's supposed to be easy for people to learn. And Bala was a Pele king. So we used to call people Balami, Pele people in the Ganta era, and it's a kind of derogatory. You've got Balaze, is a famous Mano name, Bala. So I'm not sure if he's half Pele, half Mano, or what's going on, but definitely what he's describing sounds a lot like the Upper St. John River. Nyakwe, second born. Is Balu the name of the dialect or the clan or the name of his chiefdom at the time? This is a very long time ago. So some of those chiefdom names are no longer existing, especially if they were devastated by slavery. So they will raid towns and kill people, all those kinds of things. So who knows what happens here? And what we also know is many of those people, this is before Samori Toure came and did a scorched earth of those areas. So many of those towns no longer exist. And the descendants of those people today are Maninka, right? Konokai. So this is before there was such a thing as Konokai. This is in the 1830s. The Konokai was created during the Samori Toure reign in the 1880s.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is the Liberia History Channel. We are discussing the Amistad captives of the Gola rainforest.
Yes.
These were men and women who fought for their own freedom on a ship where their dignity was not recognized as human beings. And so if you are here and you're able to speak Mende, please help us with these names. Bangna, sand or gravel.
So Banja.
He's 5 feet 3 inches. Was born in Dugana in the Konon country, where his king Daga lived. His parents are dead, and he lived with his brother, a planter of rice.
So this guy is from the Vai Kingdom.
Yeah.
Possibly Gola Kingdom. Manja. And my favorite, but she unfortunately she perished. Magru, possibly Mapu. Magu, I'm not sure. I don't know what Mapu means. It means black snake. I'm not sure of her ethnicity. If anybody's watching that knows what black snake means in any of our languages, does it sound anything like Magru or Mabu or Magufu, something like that? She's 4 feet 3 inches tall. So she's a child, very young girl with a large, high forehead, like myself. Her parents were living. She had 4 sisters and 2 brothers. And she was pawned by her father for a debt which, being unpaid, she was sold into slavery. So her father owed somebody money. Say, you know what? I have 4 daughters. Take one to take care of my debt. Take this one with a big forehead, Carol. Because one thing that the slave trade did, the effect it had on the culture of West Africans, that human beings now became saleable property as opposed to sovereign entities, self-determinate beings. They now become property. Women are property of their husbands. Children are property of their parents, to be bought and sold like goats. You sell your daughter, you buy your wife, you sell your child to pay debt. This is the impact that the transatlantic slave trade had on African culture.
And so if you are watching us, what is black snake in your language? So we can know what Magru.
So people didn't like, oh, they go name a black snake. Then they stole her into slavery. Poor child.
Yeah, black snake could be, because I heard, one guy who was, describing the beauty of his girlfriend and said, "Oh, your skin is smooth as black snake skin." So,
okay. So maybe that is a term of endearment, right?
Right, it could be endearment.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So these are newspaper clippings from the time, just to kind of show how everybody was in this frenzy. They had never seen this kind of thing. And then the ship lands on the shore and these Africans just walking into town, It was crazy. And so this is a print of Singbe or Sinke that appeared in the Sun on August 31st, 1839. That's how they drew him. So they had stenographers and sketchers go out and draw him, and this is Joseph Sinke, and the Spaniards were the ones that were trying to span it, to make his name sound European. And then this other, what I circled in red, is from the Washington Post this was March 15, 1841. And this is now why the case is going on. The case of the Amistad was revealed. Of the Amistad, we avail ourselves for the benefits of our readers. The earliest opportunity of publishing in the preceding columns, the opinion of the Supreme Court in the case of the Amistad, lately decided before the tribunal. So we all know that they used to take these illegal slave vessels, and it was like the people who established New Georgia, for example, they were taken into a tribunal in Savannah, Georgia. They keep them in cells, and it's all a bunch of frenzy to see if these are really Africans that should be returned to Africa, or if they should be lawfully kept into slavery. Just a ridiculous period in history. But in this particular case, they were being held in tribunal, fighting for their lives and for their liberty.
And they call him Joseph Singis.
Yeah, that Singbe Pierre was his name. Singbe Pierre.
So this opinion, Supreme Court,
Yes.
the United States
So this
versus
image is the actual. This is the actual opinion. That's how they wrote stuff. There was no typing at that time. It's 1841. There was no typing. So this is an actual copy of the Supreme Court ruling. Go ahead, Dennis.
opinion of the Supreme Court in the United States versus the Amistad. This is March 9, 1841. The libellants and claimants of the schooner Amistad, her tackle, apparel, and furniture, together with her cargo, and the Africans mentioned and described in the several libel and claims, beginning to the right of the vertical line, on appeal from the Circuit Court to the United States for the District of Connecticut.
Yeah.
And then you have this fine, fancy writing.
Yes. The ruling continues to the next two slides.
The case came on to be heard on the transcript of the record from the Circuit Court of the United States for the District of Connecticut, and was argued by counsel on consideration whereof it is the opinion of this court that there is error in that part of the decree of the Circuit Court affirming the decrees of the District Court which ordered the said Negroes to be delivered to the President of the United States to be transported to Africa in pursuance of the Act of Congress of the 3rd of March, 1819, and that has to that part, it ought to be underlined, reversed, and underlined, and in all other respects, that the said decree of the Circuit Court ought to be affirmed.
Yeah.
It is therefore ordered adjudged and decreed by this court that the decree of the said Circuit Court be and the same is hereby affirmed, except as to the part aforesaid, and as to that part that it be reversed, and that the case be remanded to the Circuit Court with directions to enter in lieu of that part of decree that the said Negroes be and are hereby declared to be free, and that they be dismissed from the custody of the court and be discharged from the suit, and so thereof guilt without day. March 9, 1841.
Yes. Now, the previous slide, I want to point out that picture of that horrid-looking human being was the Supreme Court Chief Justice, Roger B. Taney. He was the 5th Chief Justice of the United States. He presided over this case and delivered the opinion. And the whole thing ended up triumphantly, of course. They won, right? They were able to successfully be liberated. They liberated themselves. They fought like hell, language barriers. Things fell in line. I mean, you had, you have here a beautiful success story. And the next page kind of gives you a summary of what happened after they were liberated.
By the time Amistad case came to an end, it had to be embittered feelings between the anti-slavery North and the slave-holding South that it must be counted as one of the events leading to the outbreak of the American Civil War in 1860. Yeah. Although the Supreme Court's decision in the Amistad case was not an attack on slavery, it drew the abolitionists together and prevented their movement from breaking up. Moreover, the missionary work that began with the freedom of the Amistad Africans led to the foundation of the American Missionary Association in 1846, which was the largest and best organized abolitionist society in the United States before the outbreak of the Civil War. After that war, the association established more than 500 schools and colleges in the South and in the border states for the education of newly liberated Blacks. These schools evolved into Atlanta, Howard, Fisk, and De La universities, Hampton Institute, Talladega College, etc. to which countless Black Americans owe their higher education. The Amistad case thus gave rise to this tremendous network of institutions in the South that educated the leaders of the modern day civil rights movement, including the Venerable Martin Luther King Jr., the Amistad Rebellion, which began with the determination of Sengbe Pierre and 52 other Sierra Leoneans not to accept enforced slavery, has had far-reaching consequences on two continents. Although the origins are in motion by this revolt, will continue to influence the course of historical development in both the United States and Sierra Leone, thanks in large measure to the courage of Sengbe.
Sengbe Pierre.
Sengbe Pierre.
Who technically at least half of these people would have been classified as Liberian today, not Sierra Leonean. But again, because we have this whole thing where we erase ourselves and the world there accepts our erasure from history, we have to, there's no Nyakwes in that part of West Africa. They're contained within Liberia in a small area in Guinea, but for the most part, the description he gives is clear. So that basically concludes my presentation. I just wanted to show the connection between Liberia and these people and this revolt, and how these descendants of our forefathers were able to shake the course of human history and shape at the same time the course of human history. So James Covey is the one in the sketch there, the young boy who was 18 years old. I think they were just claiming he was 18. I don't think they knew he was a child. But because he was so young, the legal age of adulthood is 18, they just pretended he was 18. It's probably more like 14. But he did a tremendously good job at translating for these people. And you can see some of the errors in the translation, but he still did a wonderful job. And then you've got a drawing, of course, of what it would call Singpe, but it was Sengbe Pierre, the leader of the revolt, who was also a very young man at the time.
Sengbe Pierre. If you are watching us and want to be part of the conversation, please call the number that's on your screen, 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403#. And Dr. Abdullah Dukle is watching us on the big screen at his house. And so he's showing us the picture. And you see,
hey, Dr. Duke.
So if you are watching us on your big screen, I was seeing someone call me and say, "Oh, my dad is watching you on the big screen here." And it's, that's good. So when you're watching us, send us a picture of what you're watching, and
yes,
also give us a call. Last week, sometimes some people say, "Oh, I don't have question. It's good. I like it." You can still call and say, "I like this. It's good." And so we will connect the phone lines. Let me also announce that tomorrow we're going to be discussing tithes and offerings in Hello Pastor. This is part 2. So should we pay tithe in church or not? Is it biblical? We're going to answer those questions tomorrow. In the meantime, please place your call and let's talk about the Amistad, right? And call, you said something, you said Liberian would like to erase ourselves from history. Explain that.
Because we have been fed this kind of really buffoonish narrative about our origins and our history, we have a tendency to feel like we didn't come from anything, we never accomplished anything, Liberians never did anything. We, cling to things that make no sense. Sometimes, we came from, we're the real Hebrews. You'll hear this kind of bizarre stuff, but they don't really take the energy or the time to study themselves. We don't do that, and it's not okay. Because we've been thoroughly, groomed to detest anything about our past And we don't want to dig into it because we think that everything there is bad and it deserves to be buried. So we've been removed from our rightful place in history and from the respectable commentary of world history, which is unfortunate. I mean, even the OAU, which was founded essentially by Liberians, by Tubman, and he's basically a footnote. He should be the most prominent figure in Addis Ababa. And Liberian diplomats go there, they have no problem saying, oh, that man was a dictator. Well, who wasn't a dictator? Kwame Nkrumah, you trying to tell me he wasn't a dictator? Who wasn't a dictator? The only Liberian people get problem with dictator. I mean, at that time, what was the world like? We don't, like to respect the contribution. And, human beings are complicated. I say Tubman was 100% a good person. He was a great person. He's one of the greatest leaders. He was the one that all of those that followed in the African liberation movement emulated. You got Mobutu Sese Seko used to try to copy everything Tubman did when he came to power. Not that Mobutu's a good person, but he is honored and respected more than Tubman. Why? So and so many other things, even the contributions of our indigenous people to world history. We did the story of Samori Toure. We pointed out all of the connections he had with Liberia. Nobody knew about it. Oh, I didn't know this was relevant to Liberian history. Of course it is.
Let's bring in two of our callers here. First, Kennedy Corey say, thanks for the presentation. This is very informative. And I mean, I'm learning so much. Let me bring on the callers now. We have our first caller here, Divine. 872 area code, your name and where you calling from.
Hello, I just wanted to say, Cole, Dennis, you guys do such a great job. I really enjoy watching your segment. A question that I had was, so I know you said Blanco was Spanish and he was on the coast of Liberia. Was he like a mixed race Spanish person? Why was he there? Or was he like a full?
He was a Spaniard. Pedro Blanco was just like his name. He was white.
Okay.
And what you say your name is? Richard, you said?
Yes, my name is Rashad. I'm from Dallas. I watch you guys all the time. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, and according to call now, Pedro Blanco, there were other white people along that same coast doing that horrible thing of selling human beings.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. But thank you so much for
calling. I also love how you highlight the fact that with Liberian history, because I was speaking to someone about this today, our country's name and the area has been changed so many times. So I love when you bring up the reference map to kind of show, what the country was called during that time. Yeah. Because there is this stigma that our history is lost or is not there. It is there. It's just been so mismatched and mislabeled that what we know as Liberia today it's hard to find online when you just type in Liberian history. So I really love how you also stick to the context of the time and you always mention what it was called during that time. It's super helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate you. Thanks for calling.
Thank you so much. Let me bring on my friend Stephen Adams.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening and good afternoon. Good evening, Mrs. Family. This is, I can tell you, I've been trying to connect with this show when you were on many times. I was talking to Mr. Jai about how professional you are and how, I would like to just sit down and talk with you one day for 10 hours. But and this may be a little bit off key because I just tuned into your discussion. But what touched me just now was your suggestion or your suggestion that we tend to denigrate anything that is denigrate our own culture. Let me say that. Denigrate our own culture. I want to know what's your opinion, or what's your take on people like me that ascribe to our culture and try to embrace our culture, like the Poorer Society and things of that nature, and the rest of the community seems to belittle or denigrate, calling those cultural activities or satanic and things of that nature. That's one of the things I want you to address. And the second thing is, I happen to have had the occasion to work as the owner company that built bridges across Liberia. And I built the bridge from a town in Grand Jidit to Ivory Coast. And during that project, I had the opportunity to travel deep inside Ivory Coast and found the people in Grand Jidit on both sides of the divide to be the same people, speaking the same language and all the same culture. How is it that our country managed to lose all of those territories? I'll just listen to you address those issues, man.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much for calling.
So when we did the presidential series, we were very meticulous through all of those, kind of explaining different presidents, what happened during their terms and how they had to struggle violently, often also legally, to prevent Liberian territory from being seized by the French and the British during the scramble for Africa. Even after they sat at the table for the Berlin Conference, of course, Liberia was not invited because the plan was to divide Liberia between France and England, but the Liberians did not agree. So the French forcibly seized territory, and those members of some of those ethnic groups that were in the vicinity of Liberia, like the Dan, the people we call Pra today, and these people were able to successfully resist the encroachment of the French. Because of the proximity to Liberia, they chose to not go the way of their cousins and across the Kavala. And the same thing happened with Ma people, with the French encroachment. It happened with the Bandi people in the Gola forest. It happened with the Vai people in Grand Cape Mount. Galena split the territory because the British fought and seized up to the Makana River, and the Vai resisted on the Liberia, what remains the Liberia side. So we may do an episode about Liberia's fleeting territory specifically. I think that would be a good idea. But it wasn't a one-day event. Liberia has been under siege from the moment Liberia declared itself a sovereign state. They've done everything to destroy the country. Beginning in 1847, there's not a president that had peace. There's not a president of Liberia that had peace. They were, until after the coup, really, right? Because every president before then, including Tubman, even though people say he was a puppet, he was walking a fine line trying to keep the country together. Every predecessor of Talbot was in danger of losing the country's sovereignty. You know, from the partitioning of Africa to the Cold War. It has been, economic sovereignty, from physical land sovereignty to economic sovereignty later on. So Liberia's existence is a miracle.
Yeah. Let me bring on our last caller here. That's Leslie Wills, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly.
I always have a number of topics to bring in, but wonderful discussion. Supposedly they built the huts that the Africans were held in off the Amistad in Connecticut, I believe, and they tried to make it into a tourist little community. And also they rebuilt the Amistad around there. Do you know anyone that has ever seen that? I don't know if it still exists.
They weren't kept in huts. They were kept in jail. And I clearly said that in the presentation. They were kept in jail cells. The Amistad captives were kept in jail cells.
Oh, so they just made up that village to make it look like that was something where the Africans were held. But I was just reading that in Wikipedia. But the United States was built on slavery. The first 12 presidents were all slave owners, except John Adams and John Quincy Adams. And John Adams was the one that tried that case at the Supreme Court. But I'm curious. I've always been curious about Grand Cape Mount. Supposedly, it was made into a county the year before Maryland became a county of Liberia. But then it was remade into a county in 1926. And I don't know where the confusion is, but if you read any book, they always get those two dates messed up, 1856, 1926. And I'm just curious, did they try to make it into a county and then the British made it impossible, or the Americans made it impossible for them to control the area?
Thank you.
So just to answer that really quick, with Cape Mount, it was being encroached upon by the British. They seized Galenas. They tried to seize Cape Mount. Cape Mount threw itself, because it was a sovereign kingdom, so threw themselves at the mercy of the Liberian government for protections, that we don't want to be British. They've already conquered our people on the other side of the river. They're torturing them. They've subjugated them. It's a horrible scene, because the British were violent in conquering territory around Sierra Leone. They burned towns, because any resistance they put out with violence. And so they were like, listen, we are going to lose everything. Sovereignty was no longer an option. It was either you become subdued and have your land rights taken by the British, or you become Liberian. So they threw themselves to the Liberian government, said, we want to be Liberian. The Liberian government's response to the king was, yes, you can be part of the Liberian territory. We recognize you, but you cannot be king. You are now a citizen. You have to give up your crown, and your slaves are no longer slaves. They are now our citizens too. So Cape Mount becomes Liberian territory, but it becomes incorporated fully as a county later, which means it's a fully annexed administrative district. There is no semi-sovereignty. It means it is fully annexed as an administrative district of Liberia, where you have representatives and senators. It is fully annexed. It took time, because these people were not trying, really. They were looking to incorporation was a gradual process. Many of these powerful aristocratic people who had this long history of selling slaves were not trying to be fully Liberian in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, right? They wanted to maintain their way of life.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Can I just make one more point, or am I going too long?
Yeah, quickly, please.
Okay. We don't have in Liberia and Sierra Leone the great slave forts and castles like Ghana, but Blanco and Kanat both built sumptuous slave palaces, both in Sulima, in the Galenas, in an area in Sierra Leone now, as well as on Cape Mount, where they built actual mansions and things like that. Are any of those buildings still standing? I know they would be in decay, but are they still standing?
So
No.
Bounce Island is the only place where you still have any remnants, right? Because the British, when they put Bounce Island down, they didn't destroy the infrastructure. Joseph Jenkins Roberts was a violent abolitionist when he was a general and then deputy governor and governor. When he was snuffing out the slave trade, he did so by blowing stuff up and liberating the people and incorporating them into Liberia. He did not leave remnants. He wanted to destroy it. And the other powerful thing that happened is when they would destroy these slave trading areas, they would build towns to settle not only the liberated people that they liberated there, but also recaptured Africans and repatriated African Americans. So all of our towns along our coast are former slave factories. Buchanan, Marshall. So all of these areas, Robertsport, Greenville and Sino, these are all built on top of old areas where there were basically huge slave markets.
Thank you. And thank you, Will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
And Stephen Adam asked a question, and part of it was, how do we deal with the denigration of our cultural heritage, like the Poro Society, when he called? He wanted you to comment on that.
I'm sorry, he was asking about, I'm sorry, say that again.
He said, how do we deal with the denigration of our cultural heritage? Example, the Poro Society. He said, like, he's proud to be Poro, but there are people who are saying it's satanic, it's primitive. So what's your take on how do we deal with that?
We talk about that all the time on here, right? So when people become Muslim, they're taught that traditional African things are demonic. When people become Christian, they're taught that the traditional African things are demonic. But traditional Arab things are not demonic. Traditional European things are not demonic. It's only African tradition that's demonized, right? So we practice pagan rituals. You know, you see Muslims practicing the pagan cultural rituals of Arabs, and they don't see that as being bad. You see Christians practicing the pagan cultural rituals of Europeans. We don't see that as being bad, right? Polygamy has nothing to do with Islam. It has to do with Arab culture. Getting married in white dress and having Christmas tree has nothing to do with Christmas. It has to do with European pagan culture. So we have no problem as Africans adopting pagan rituals and pagan customs from our conquerors, but we reject our own traditions. And this is what happens to people who are conquered. They are taught and groomed and trained to think of themselves as inferior and their customs and their ancestors as inferior. So education is what gives people, and dignity is what gives people the respect and reverence for the past. It doesn't mean you have to live in the past, but you should at least have respect from the people that brought you into being. You know, and that is something that many Africans have lost. You use the word ancestor among Africans, the first thing they think is, you know, voodoo, hocus pocus, weird stuff. You know, but Europeans make us honor their ancestors. They call them saints. They call them angels, right? They deify their great people who were, you know, physical human beings. They deify them in death, but we're not allowed to do it because we've been conquered. So it's just education and giving people their dignity and their self-respect back.
Thank you. Denzi TV. And I want us to kind of speak today. I want to speak to this in a different way. Is it called you need to be our cultural minister or ambassador? So
get culture minister.
so
the government already bid that y'all want to create culture ministry. You talk about the Ministry of Information, Culture, and Tourism.
And that's the point I want to speak to, right? Because everything to fix the issue, we always want to use government, right?
Yeah.
Take a government job. So we'll do. I was reading the Ministry of Internal Affairs, right? They wrote about Cape Mount. So on the Ministry of Internal Affairs website, and when we were talking about Cape Mount, I went to Cape Mount. I said, overview of Grand Cape Mount. Take a guess how they began the story. This is how it began, talking about Cape Mount. In 1461, Pedro de Central, a Portuguese navigator on a mission to the west coast of Africa, saw the beauty of the Cape and mountains and named the area Cape du Mont, a Portuguese word meaning the Cape of the Mount, from which the name Grand Cape Mount County was derived. So
Yeah,
now
they don't talk about Kingdom Koya.
right.
They don't talk about Kingdom Koya. They don't talk about the ancient Vi Kingdom. And Pedro de Centro was not the first European visitor anyway. But it's just so sad.
And how do you begin talking about yourself by quoting Pedro de Centro? And it's you. Imagine I want to talk about Dodoka, and then I'm starting with what Martha Ramsey, who came as missionary in the 1930s, how she described Dodoka. And now when we're trying to fix this thing, we say, let Call be minister so she can fix it. Right? So that mentality that we're going to approach these things with government, I think the education that we start right here on the Liberia History Channel, how do we, or the people that you are watching it, how do we carry it forth so that more and more people know these things so that we can start to get liberated? And one thing you said, the pagan culture we practice in the church, like Christmas, the Santa Claus,
Easter coming up, we're going to be dealing with Easter bunny and all kind of funny things.
Easter egg, all pagan culture. We Christians on Sunday, we eat flesh and drink blood, right? But all these things are fine. But if we do it, then it's the African culture, then it's primitive. They
don't even say it's primitive, it's demonic, right? They demonize. They say it's evil.
Yeah. It's evil.
All of it is primitive. Right? It's all from very ancient cultures, but yeah, it becomes evil. Now you're attributing evil to your customs, which is sad.
And how do we fix it? We say
education. People need to be enlightened.
Yes.
And they need to see the hypocrisy. You know, I remember we were posting something about the hypocrisy with the Christians adopting Western culture. And my Muslim fellow citizens, some of them were under there, say, oh, yeah. And I'm like, seriously, the hypocrisy here too. Look at how much Arab culture you follow that has absolutely nothing to do with the Quran. Abandon your own. It's okay for Arabs to do what they were doing before Islam. And it's okay for Africans who adopt Islam to do pre-Islamic Arab cultural things. But it's not okay for Africans to do African things. No. We have to think. You think God hates you? No. You know, we have to think. And so that kind of brainwashing is what gives us an inferiority complex when we go among other human beings. We don't see ourselves as worthy. We go to other people empty, as if we've given nothing to the world when we've given so much.
Still on Cape Mount, the next paragraph says, in 1822, Liberia was founded by the American Colonization Society. You still talking about Cape Mount. Everything you say is from somewhere else. So the moral to that story is...
Who's saying 1822 Liberia was founded by the American Colonization Society? Who said that?
Ministry of Internal Affairs website.
Why is the Ministry of Internal Affairs talking about the history of Liberia? Why they're not talking about traditional history? Because first of all, you don't just go and Google something and put it on your website. If you're the Ministry of Internal Affairs, you're supposed to be dealing with our internal traditional history. I would rather they put the folklore there if they don't want to read history. But to say Liberia, which was established on July 26, 1847 through a Declaration of Independence and the creation of a constitution by Black men who wanted to assert their self-determination, and to say that white business people established Liberia is an affront to our history. Sierra Leone history will never say that they were established by the Sierra Leone Company, because ACS is the American counterpart to the Sierra Leone Company, which came first. Nobody says that. The United States got their independence in 1776. They don't say that the United States was established by British, colonists. They don't do that. but it goes back to our refusal to even allow ourselves to have a history independent of our suppression and our subjugation. We don't even want to give credit to the greatest feat in the history of modern Africa, which is those 11 men who declared the people of the Republic of Liberia to be sovereign while human beings were still involved and being subjugated in chattel slavery. This is the greatest event in modern history as it pertains to Africa's liberation. And we dismiss it and say ACS created the country. It's and then we print it on a website. It ain't the internal affairs place to articulate these things. But this is why our children are confused and chanting chants from South Africa and Kenya and all these things. This is why. You know, internal affairs should be talking about King Momoru Bopulu. They should be talking about these people. They should be talking about Kandibia and Dedawiyakwa. They should be talking about these people. King Peter Bosco, they should be talking about these people. But no, they won't go on Google and put Wikipedia article on their website. Meanwhile, taxpayer money is funding their institution.
That's it.
When you ain't get a neck, don't wear the chain.
I know. Hey, you make call speak parable tonight. Thank you. Well, let's conclude on the Amistad. I mean, this is an incredible story.
Powerful, yes. So basically, the story should serve as an inspiration to us, to our people. It basically is letting us know that under the most grueling circumstances, against tremendous odds, you have this success story. They were supposed to be killed. You know, why weren't they just hung or murdered or burned, you know? Intelligence met opportunity, and they were able to successfully argue, even after losing case upon case until it reached the Supreme Court, reached the House of Wise Men, the House of Wisdom, before they were recognized. And the powerful thing of them being returned, you know, to West Africa. And many of them could not go home because their homes were no longer there. But they went on to contribute tremendously to the upliftment of other African people in the Americas and in West Africa. This is powerful. So please go. There's a lot of books written about the Amistad captives. Their primary sources also available. You know, and I will post some under some references under the podcast when Dennis is done. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. And because this issue was brought up about our territory and people get confused, I think we're going to have a class where we specifically talk about, I mean, not class, a show. Sorry, this is just a podcast, not a class, but we'll have a next Saturday. We'll talk specifically about Liberian territory. And we'll talk about the different points in which our territory was lost and gained and how that worked.
So join us next Saturday, Liberia's territory, that's March 9, same time, same place. Yeah. And call, there's a few comments here. Mark Wheeler said, the greatest teacher, he's talking about you. Telly Brown, my colleague from Staten Island, says, I'm driving and have to stop to honor this great fountain of knowledge called Call. You are a real and true defender of humanity and the culture of Liberia.
Wow.
Thank you, Kelly. Well, we want to thank you again, Carl, for tonight and your entire team. I know it's been a long day because every Saturday, you and your colleagues teach a class, the Leadership Academy in Liberia.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that before we even close.
So the Liberia Leadership Academy courses, right now we're doing ethical citizenship courses where we are teaching young Liberians. We do a group of 20 students at a time. We teach them, give them a backdrop of pre-Liberian history from antiquity to the establishment of the Republic, why it was established, and then we get into the responsibility of citizens and the roles and responsibilities of government. After going through this process, young people learn that there were nations and kingdoms existing on the Grain Coast before Liberia was established. They learned the names of our ancient kings, the ones whose names survive to this day. They learned what they did, who they were. They also go on to learn about our Declaration of Independence, a little bit about why Liberia was necessary to be established as an asylum for oppressed African people. And they learn about the 1847 Constitution. Ethical citizenship also teaches anti-tribalism. It teaches young people about what the importance of citizenship is and to recognize and respect the diversity of your fellow citizens. And also it helps them to understand the rights that the half of their fellow citizens, women, have, and their responsibility also to contribute to the advancement of the state. One of the slogans we usually say in the class is that women hold up half the sky, so that we cannot advance fully if all of our people do not advance fully in their intellectual capacities. It is very fulfilling when the young people finish the class, they lift their chin up a little bit higher and they have a different perspective. Instead of thinking of being Liberian as a curse because of our current condition, they see it as a challenge, a call to action, that they themselves must take responsibility and be part of the change that will advance their country into the future. So please support what we're doing. It's working. And we're doing this literally from our little nickels and dimes that we're putting together. And so any support that you can help the Liberia Leadership Academy with, we would greatly appreciate it. Even if that $5, it will go towards this project.
How do they send that support?
So I will post a link in there. If you could post a link too, that would be great. I see that you're on there. If you could post a link in the comments for us, that would be wonderful. So you can also go to savethestateliberia.org, and there's a link there for donations as well.
Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you for the work that you do. I know our ancestors are looking down now, smiling, and say, yes, Kandibia is gone, but we still have people. Momoru is, we still have people doing that, carrying on the work.
Yeah.
We want to thank our viewers for watching, and even those who watch later. Always continue, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook, and all social media platform. Look at the playlist and go over it. There's tons of videos that we've produced already, and use that. Yes, government may do something, but in the meantime, let's do our part. Somebody told me, government is like a country gown; it can fit anybody. So anyone. So let us not wait for government. And
Elmer has posted the link to there. So.
So if you want this, the link is there. So please click on it and contribute the little you can. As long as it's little consistent. If you say $5 every month, $10 every week, anything that you can do to help.
The sponsorship for each student is $180 for the entire course. So most of us, we're just paying for it out of our pockets, when the students don't have the money, which they never do. So it's on us. So even if you want to just sponsor one student, or if you want to say, okay, I can't sponsor a whole 180, but I'll give $10 or whatever, it adds up. And it helps relieve the burden on us who are teaching the class, so we don't have to also pay. We volunteer in our time, and we also got to pay for the students' transportation and stuff like that. It gets to be a bit much, but we love what we're doing. We believe in it, and it's our contribution to our fellow citizens and help to supplement the education they're getting from Liberia with some deeper knowledge of themselves and their country.
Thank you so much, and thanks for donating. Thanks for always watching Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Until then, we close with the song that says, we are all Liberians. And I'm very proud to be connected to Singbe Pierre and the rest of his
Yes.
men and women. Good night and God bless you. We all Liberians, y'all. Let's take pride in
Thank
that.
you, okay.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our